And we welcome you, though, to the third hour. We appreciate you listening, no matter whether it's via iHeartRadio or terrestrial radio, 100.7 FM WFLA. Let's go to the Prime Meridian Bank Home Loan Hotline. Standing by, good friend of the radio show, President, CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, Mark Wilson. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. The Governor's Economic Summit, boy, it was all the news on Fox yesterday. They had about every segment on their programming yesterday coming from Orlando and this summit. What were the expectations, Mark? What's the purpose of this Governor's Summit?
Well, Preston, thank you. So the Florida Chamber co-hosted Rick Scott's. It was a national economic summit yesterday. There were 7 potential presidential candidates who all came to Florida yesterday. And the summit focused national attention. By the way, there were over 400 people there and about 200 members of the national media. And what was long overdue, Preston, is there was a phenomenal conversation about the future of America and job growth, and how the theme of the day was the next president of the United States needs to do at the national level what Rick Scott and Florida businesses have done in Florida. It was a great day for Florida. Frankly, it was the best one-day economic summit I've ever attended in my life, and a lot of the credit goes to Rick Scott, Melissa Sellers, and the team that pulled it off. It was a big win for Florida yesterday.
What is it that we have done so successfully, Mark?
So, Preston, thank you for that. And I've been blessed to be on your program so many times, and over the years I've shared with your listeners that the rest of the nation is paying close attention to what Florida has done. Our education system's gone from the bottom 10 to top 10. Our taxes, not only do we not have an income tax, we've cut taxes over 40 times in 5 years. We've eliminated 3,200 regulations at the state level. We have invested record levels in environmental protection, what we're trying to do with water quality, record levels of investment in transportation. We've lowered taxes, we've raised revenues, and Floridians are better off for it. So the rest of the country has been noticing this, even though the mainstream media in Florida refuses to tell that story, and even though the average voter in Florida doesn't get that news every day. The rest of the country is seeing it. And what I saw all day long yesterday from everybody from Governor Huckabee to Governor Walker in Wisconsin to Governor Jindal in Louisiana, even former Governor Perry in Texas, everyone talked about wanting to be like Florida and that the next president needs to do what Florida has done. And I think it was a well-deserved recognition for Governor Scott's leadership. And it was, frankly, it reminded me of what it was like when Ronald Reagan was in charge. Everybody was talking about freedom, talking about states competing, and job growth instead of what people in Washington could do. It's a really good day.
Mark Wilson with us, President, CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, talking about the Governor's Economic Growth Summit yesterday in Orlando. Mark, you mentioned a couple of things that I think are worth highlighting again. One is that, you know, we oftentimes talk, and I know that I can be guilty of talking an awful lot about the importance of a tax system that is sane, that is responsible, that is restrained. But if it doesn't go hand in hand with the regulatory shift and the reduction in regulation, you're not getting the impact that you could get, because the combination of the two is a remarkable economic driver.
Yeah, and that actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, Preston. That was a big theme yesterday. We talked about the regulatory tsunami coming out of the Obama administration, what the EPA is doing, what is coming out left and right. Bottom line is there's about $11 trillion of wealth outside the United States that wants to come back in. These are manufacturing jobs. These are high-wage jobs. But American regulatory policy and tax policy at the federal level is basically pushing jobs and businesses outside the U.S. And the theme yesterday is we need all of that back. And it's policy choices in Washington that are killing our economy.
Mark Wilson with us this morning on the morning show. Mark, 15 minutes past 8. Stand by for just 1 second. We check in with the Weather Channel Forecast Center 4 times an hour during the morning show. Let's go to Terry Smith with your WFLA forecast.
Hey there, Preston. Got to get some things done. Morning hours look good. This afternoon, it could be a bit iffy with some scattered thunderstorms, 88. Only a slight chance of a thunderstorm, though, tomorrow, highs 91. I'm 100.7 FM, WFLA's Terry Smith in the Weather Channel Forecast Center.
Mark Wilson with the Florida Chamber from the Governor's Economic Growth Summit down in South Florida, well, Central Florida, actually, in Tampa. Mark, tell me this. We've got, obviously, the session in special session right now, the legislature trying to get their arms around not only the constitutionally mandated budget, but also health care issues. The impact of Obamacare in the state of Florida from an economic standpoint, can you quantify it?
Yeah, it's actually very difficult to quantify because the main problem with Obamacare is it doesn't work. We're one of the states that's really caught in the middle. What we needed to do, Preston, was we needed a block grant to Florida where Florida's leaders could come up with a Florida solution to cover those who need health insurance and to put the focus back on jobs. If you have a job, you're going to get health insurance. So what's happening now is with all of the, Congress passed this and they didn't read it and they admitted that. Now we have the courts weighing in. There's a major Supreme Court case coming in June, later this month, that might undo most of Obamacare. So, Preston, like I've said on this program before, the cost of uncertainty, right? Health insurance premiums have gone up since Obamacare passed. Not everyone has health insurance. We were told everyone would have health insurance. So it's back to what you said a few minutes ago about the regulatory environment in this country. Obamacare is one more example where if you're a small business today, you're afraid to hire 2 or 3 more people because you have no idea what it's going to mean to your insurance, to Obamacare. Exactly the wrong thing we need right now.
You mentioned that even in the waters that are very unfriendly to economic growth nationally, Florida has somehow managed to gain some turf here. One of the things that's interesting to me is yesterday, Mark, we talked about the fact that the unemployment numbers dropping nationally are due in almost entirely to people dropping out of the surge. They're not counted anymore. That's not the same as creating jobs, which is what has happened in Florida.
Yeah, and Preston, I've actually talked about that for a few years now, is the President Obama's administration actually has started to change the way we calculate unemployment. We need to look at the number of people who are working, right? In Florida, that's over 9 million. And what we need to do is we need to look at the people who could be working. And that's the real way to look at the unemployment numbers. Now there's this new way of looking at unemployment, which is, well, I'm going to stop looking. I'm going to take advantage of all of these free government entitlements. I'm going to stop looking. And now I'm no longer counted as one of the unemployed. And Preston, Rick Scott's National Economic Summit yesterday, this was one of the key focuses that, in this country, we have a philosophical difference going on between, some want economic equality for all. We believe in economic opportunity for all, which is why educational choice and jobs are so important. And I think that's what this next presidential election is going to be about. We have governors in many states who want to honor getting a job, right? And we have those in Washington who want to honor you deserve this because you're an American. And that's not what America was built on.
Mark Wilson with us from the Florida Chamber. Mark, you mentioned all of the governors, former governors that came from states around the country, many of them presidential candidates looking ahead to 2016. What did they bring to the table? Did they bring ideas themselves, or did they come to just reflect on what we're doing in Florida?
Yes, that's a great question. So every single one of the 7 candidates that spoke, or potential candidates, they all gave kudos to Florida. They all referenced that Florida was really a national example of what we've done on jobs, what we've done on education. But then each potential candidate talked about what they would do to get back to a 4% job growth in this country. They would lower the tax rate. They would simplify the tax structure. Some said they would get rid of the IRS. Many would go to an improved education system, eliminate, again, thousands of regulations at the federal level. Mm-hmm. One candidate mentioned, it ought to be at least as hard to get welfare as it is to get a building permit, as an example. And that really resonated, that we really need to put the premium back on small businesses. And I think what the media noticed yesterday was a common theme that every candidate brought to the table. But everybody had their own take on how to grow the economy.
Moving forward, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners from this particular event?
Well, again, if you happen to see Governor Scott around town, I think we owe him a big thanks, because on a national scale, Florida was the big winner yesterday. The nation's leaders got to see what's happening in Florida, and they got to see there were over 200 members of the National Press Corps that really got an up-close look at what everyone's talking about that's going on here in Florida. The biggest takeaway is I think that all 7 of these potential presidential candidates are very focused on growing the economy. And if you're worried about our nation's debt, if you're worried about how we're falling behind on competitiveness issues, every single candidate put a platform forward that returns this country to a country that focuses on small business job growth. And that's pretty exciting when you're the president of the Chamber of Commerce.
Well done, Mark. Thanks for the intel on what took place, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Preston.
All right, Mark Wilson with us, President and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, our guest on the Prime Meridian Bank Home Loan Hotline, talking to us from Tampa and the Governor's Economic Growth Summit here on WFLA.